Hey guys, welcome back. And here we are. The final part of What If Naruto Was a Hollow. It's been a long and satisfying run with ups and downs. I'll have much more to say at the end, but first, let's start the what if. What? Naruto's trying to do what? Minato and Kushina looked shocked as their daughter briefed to them Naruto's plan for Soul Society, all while keeping themselves on their toes in case he attacked. Taiki had joined them, and the family of four stared down their estranged son and brother. Akane was about to say something further, until Naruto burst in on their little parade, right in between the four of them. Minato and Kushina didn't do anything but flinch, as if they were still in disbelief that this hollow was their son. "I'm still here, you know," Naruto said, laughing in their faces. "You don't seem to get the situation you're in right now. Maybe this will help you jog your memory." Zero Esperal. Naruto slammed his hands downward, throwing an Resurrection enhanced Zero Esperal out onto the battlefield. Before it even hit the ground, Naruto had flashed away as to not get caught in the crossfire, watching as the orange energy spiraled in on itself. "I can handle this," Taiki shouted, his Ryatsu humming to life. Over to the side, the four pillars that was his Bankai clattered and shook as they resonated with their master. Within a split second, a gray barrier had sprouted up around the area, covering both the bodies of the Namikaze family and containing the Zero Esperal from getting out of control. Minato, Kushina, and Akane breathed a sigh of relief as the Zero Esperal harmlessly lapped at their shields, and when it dissipated completely, Taiki withdrew the barrier. "This plan is nuts. He plans on bringing together the human world, Huecomundo, and Soul Society. Do you know what would happen to the Serete if such a thing were allowed to happen?" Kushina asked, her gray barrier dispelling. "Yeah. It would cease to exist, and the human world would become more of a breeding ground for hollows than it already is. But, we don't even know how to stop this." Naruto flashed back into existence via Sonido where he had started standing, a lackadaisical posture being how he stood. He stretched out his long, black claws casually, without even looking at the family. "You don't get it, do ya? You're running out of time here. Haven't you noticed the air get a little bit heavier as time goes on, and the sky getting a little closer?" he said, gesturing to the portal overhead. "There is no way to stop it." Naruto guffawed, throwing his arm out in a sweeping gesture. "Once I activated the machine, it was inevitable that the worlds would come together once more. He was cut off by Akane appearing in his blind spot, to which Naruto put a claw to the floor and hand vaulted underneath the swipe from Akane's special sword. "Don't listen to him, everyone. There's gotta be a way to reverse the process. We just need to focus on beating him, right now. And we need your help, Mom." "Dad," she shouted. "I know it's hard to see someone you cared about so much turn into this. I wish I could understand what you must be feeling right now, but you both need to understand that he must be stopped." Her speech got a hand clenched around her neck for her troubles, as Naruto threw her away like garbage while she was distracted. He then turned to his parents. Minato had a resolute look on his face as he stood there with his Shirkai activated, while Kushina still looked unsure. "Kushina. Akane is right. Naruto, he may have been our son at some point, but it's clear that somewhere along the line he became twisted and evil. From this point on, not a day will go by where I will not regret doing more to prevent this outcome, and not a day will go by where I will not lament what has happened to our son, but..." He trailed off, his breath hitching in his throat. "We need to stop him from tearing the world apart. Whether this means killing him, I don't know, but it is our duty as Shinigami to protect the Soul Society, no matter the cost." Minato held his Shirkai out, and was promptly nearly beheaded by Naruto, who had appeared right in front of him and thrust his claws outward just after Minato managed to get his blade up to block it. "So, you've resigned yourself to killing me, Dad?" Naruto sneered mockingly, laughing at his own joke as he pushed against Minato's sword. "Well, good. I wouldn't have that any other way. I want you to feel the pain before I rip your heart out." But just to make it more interesting, I think I'll kill you last. You bastard! Leave him alone. Taiki called out to him. Shut your damn hole, already. I wasn't talking to you. I'll kill you in a little while, so just sit there like a good fucker and wait, he screamed back, before his breathing slowed and he calmed down. Hey, Namikaze Minato, do you want to know the circumstances of how I died? He asked slyly, looking straight into Minato's eyes with his own masked face. The two broke contact with each other, both of them skidding back a good distance. How you died? Don't you mean how you became a hollow? Minato asked. No, you should already know how I became a hollow. I'm talking about how I died back in Konoha. Pay attention to this, it has everything to do with you. Dad, maybe you should. No. Don't interfere yet. I want to listen to this. Minato replied, his voice becoming quieter and more reserved than it usually was. Naruto grinned, apparently eager to tell the tale. Okay, then. Where should I start? Naruto hummed. I suppose it wasn't exactly you who was there when it happened. It was more of a mental projection of you, I guess. But if you're up to date on things, you should know that over 300 years ago, the village of Konoha was attacked by the Akatsuki leader, Pain. Minato didn't say anything, but his expression told Naruto that he was aware. Then you also remember that failsafe you put in the Kyuubi's seal all those years ago. If I were ever to draw out too much of the fox's power, a mental image of you would appear and repair the seal. Now, let me tell you the cause of my death, chakra exhaustion, he explained, pointing a finger upwards like a teacher lecturing a student. What does that have to do with the Kyuubi? Minato asked warily, never dropping his guard in case Naruto attacked. The Primera didn't, instead opting to flash a sick grin at Minato. Everything, and nothing. You see, when I met the image of you within my mind, I was just about to lose a battle with Konoha's primary invader. When I met you, you repaired the seal and recharged my chakra, before going on your merry fucking way. Of course, there's no way a mental projection of you would be able to actually recharge chakra. No, it just gave the impression that you did. Naruto sneered. Minato eerily wondered how Naruto could so cheerfully regale the events of his own death. If there's anything I've regretted in my life, it's that I wasn't like this from the start, but I can't deny what a massive fucking idiot I was in life when it came to pathetic loyalty to Konoha and friendship bullshit. Of course, being the moron that I was, I didn't even think that my failure of a father would give me the impression that my chakra was restored, and I would go on to completely burn out my chakra coils and kill myself. But hey, sometimes that's the way the world works. Naruto ended, shrugging his shoulders like this was some kind of foregone conclusion. So, this is really all your fault, because that's sort of the reason you've got a really big hollow problem on your hands. Silence pervaded across the rooftop, Naruto relishing in the stunned expression that had found its way onto his father's face. His sword clattered to the ground, and the rest of the family looked at Minato in alarm. Checkmate! Naruto hissed, grinning deviously as he glared at his father with the legendary Kubrick stare. He held a hand up, it was glowing with Naruto's signature orange Ryatsu. The revelation had stunned the former Hokage, whose cool posture and unflappable demeanor had been steadily breaking ever since he had learned the truth in Hueco That was the Sunday, and this new information was just the cherry on top of it for Minato. But, that was seemingly all he could say as his mind would numb to the prospect. For Naruto, it was cathartic to see his father in such a state, especially since it was right before he was about to kill him. He was in such a depressed state that the blow from Naruto's Ryatsu-coated hand would have killed him if Akane had rushed in there beforehand and blocked it with her wished-upon sword, creating a shallow cut in the palm of Naruto's claw. Naruto's smile dropped from his face, instead being replaced with an angry sneer at the annoyance. You again. Just when I was about to go in for the kill. Dad! Don't listen to him. Dad, she snarled, her red hair flecked with little droplets of blood. Minato seemingly had a vacant look in his eyes, but whether it was from guilt, shame, or sorrow, Akane didn't know. We don't even know if this monster is telling the truth. Chakra exhaustion? Sounds kinda like bullshit to me. And even if it is true, who cares? What happened back there is not your fault. It isn't anybody's fault. There's no way you could have known that the seal wouldn't reacted that like. Now, stop wallowing and help us. We need to take him down. Akane turned away from her father as she stared down Naruto, when a shadow suddenly fell over her. The figure of her father standing over her, proud and tall, came to mind, but when she looked into his eyes, she saw nothing but the sorrow and dejection that had been plastered on his face just beforehand. Minato placed a firm hand on the royal guard's shoulder, squeezing it gently. All feeling and will to fight was suddenly drained from Akane when Minato spoke. "Thank you." "Akane," Minato whispered, barely loud enough for her to hear. "But I'm afraid you're wrong." He continued. "If there's anyone who should regret how this turned out, how Naruto turned out, it's me. I have no reason to disbelieve him. The way he looks at me is different than the way he looks at all of you. Stand back, Akane." Minato took a step forward, the expression on his face never changing as he held his sword down. "It's time for me to take responsibility for this," he said softly. Bankai. The yellow sword exploded into a burst of Ryatsu as the pillar of lightning descended from the heavens, allowing Naruto to take up residence within the cloud once more. Kinten no Raijin. However, him entering the cloud was just a formality, as he always started off his Bankai in this default state, clutching the hilt of his dispersed Shurikai, which he would use to guide the lightning bolts. This time, he stepped out of the Bankai from the start, leaving it unmanned. However, he had charged his Ryatsu into the hilt once more, effectively giving him his Shurikai back while he controlled the Bankai from the outside. This time, the energy in his blade was a light blue, instead of a bright yellow. He had channeled his Ryatsu into his blade with the more powerful blue lightning used in his Arai attack. "Oh, you wanna go one-on-one? Fine by me, I don't want any distractions anyway. Of course, if you don't mind me making the first move." Naruto thrust his arms out, his black claws glowing with Ryatsu that shined like small pinpricks. He crouched down, thrusting his shoulder outward as he leveled a stare at Minato. "Diaz Balas." He thrust his claws forward, 10 bala flying from his fingertips all at once. Minato pivoted forward, avoiding the first 5, and then pivoted forward again to avoid the rest. "Stop it, Dad. Don't let him goad you into a one-on-one fight," Akane called out. "He can nullify your abilities." Minato seemed to register her words, and he ducked to the left when Naruto appeared in a Sonido flash right where he once was. The man put a knee down, shifting both his weight and his sword to his right side. He thrust 2 fingers out, curling them in the direction of his Cloud Bankai. Naruto slowly revolved his head when he saw a flash of light appear within the cloud, before Minato's Arai blast toward him. "Won't work," Akane muttered. Naruto didn't even have to move a muscle when the lightning bolt struck him, seeing as it was a Ryuryoka-based projectile attack. As it washed over him, the energy was channeled through the shoulder spikes, courtesy of his creation. The Arai had completely disappeared. "Ah!" Naruto sighed, his masked face taking on an expression of relief. His eyes cracked to his left, and he noted with satisfaction that Minato seemed duly surprised. What started out as a quiet chuckle turned into full-blown laughter, as Naruto raised a dense tail over his head. He thrust it down with all the force that he could muster, and Minato swung his sword to block it. "Idiot!" Naruto snarled, pushing farther, and Minato realized his error when his blade began to become channeled upwards towards Naruto's conductors before being absorbed fully by him. He knelt there, with nothing but the hilt of his blade, and saw 2 more heavy tails enter his field of vision from directly off to the side. Luckily for him, they were easy enough to dodge, but he was left without a weapon, and Naruto was not satisfied with that attack alone. In his shoulder spikes, he was charging Twin Zero, which were seemingly being enhanced by the amount of Ryatsu the Primera now had. While Minato was dodging his previous attack, he fired them after barely needing to charge them. They crashed against each other, forming into one giant beam as it sailed toward Minato as he reappeared. The traditional sound of a Zero blast occurred, and from the looks of it, the increased speed and power of the Zero was enough to clip Minato's right arm as he tried to get away from the subsequent attack, though he had dodged it just enough to avoid almost all of the damage. After 3 quick shunpos, he vaulted himself back within the sanctuary of his cloud, charging up his sword once again. However, he did not immediately head back out of the safety of his Bankai. Naruto was taking the initiative though, and he appeared in a burst of sonido overhead immediately after Minato had finished recovering. However, being this close to the cloud was asking for trouble. At least, that was what Minato thought. Wait a minute, the lightning bolt and my sword were both nullified when they came in contact with his body. Before Naruto could even think of getting any closer, Minato had charged all his Ryatsu into the cloud to move it away from close contact with Naruto, lest he lose his Bankai to his son as well. He maneuvered the cloud out of reach with Naruto, thrusting the hilt of his blade within its depths and recharging his sword. However, this didn't change the fact that Naruto was an extraordinarily fast Erincar, on top of the fact that riding on his Bankai cost Minato some mobility. Minato was about 15 feet away from Naruto's position, and he didn't stop moving his cloud away from Naruto yet. He drew an imaginary line from himself to Naruto, trying to gauge a safe distance where he could keep his Bankai away from the Ryuryoku absorbing Erincar. He was prepared to step out of his cloud Bankai once again and resume the fight with a different strategy, but that changed the moment Akane threw herself between Minato and Naruto. Akane! Her sword was pinned against one of Naruto's elbow spikes. She had apparently stopped him mid-sonido when he threw himself at Minato, and she was now holding him back. You have to think this through, Dad. Forget your sense of responsibility for a moment. Let's do this the right way. We know that your Shurikai is entirely made of Ryuryoku, therefore it is vulnerable to Naruto's abilities. Fighting him one-on-one in close combat with your abilities won't work. She smiled at Naruto fiercely. Fortunately, his creation can't hold up against the good old-fashioned Namikaze family battle strategy, she said proudly, stepping a step backward as Naruto pushed her forward, growling. Naruto tried impaling her on his shoulder spikes, but it served just to be a distraction before trying to slice her up with a quick flurry of his claws. She leaped over him once she found a hole in his offense, showing a surprising amount of agility. It's been a long time since the 4 of us teamed up to win a fight. Our battle tactics might be a little rusty. What did you have in mind, Akane? Minato asked. Quit your fucking babbling and come on already. Naruto roared. Akane squinted lightly when Naruto's Ryatsu seemed to climb yet again, but she did not lose her composure. The usual. Mom, she yelled, turning her attention to her downtrodden mother. Kushina looked up at her with heavy eyes, and Akane could see the pain on her face as she was forced to look at Naruto's monstrous state. I need you, Mom. You're the best close-range fighter I know. Here's the plan, Dad. Mom and myself will do everything we can to attack him physically from close range. We need you to stay at a distance and provide ranged support with your Bankai. Dole out orders from now on too. Taiki will also need support from you with your Bankai's barriers. Her brother nodded an affirmative at her, though Akane was not focused on him. Instead, she stared with pleading eyes at her mother, and when Kushina met her gaze, she seemed to snap out of her daze, shooting a bewildered look at Akane. Please, Mom. We need you. I know it hurts, but please, we need you to be the merciless warrior for just a little longer. Akane practically pleaded with her mother. Kushina turned her head forcefully when the Erincar they were all fighting burst into peals of laughter, folding his arms and flexing his claws as he stood before them. Are you done? Well shit, what do you plan to do now that you've revealed your battle strategy to me? He laughed, sputtered as he blocked a sudden slash from Akane with his elbow guards. Oh, we don't care. In fact, it doesn't matter if you know the way we fight. You're still going to lose, she taunted, a sneer forming on her lips, when she sliced through the spike on Naruto's elbow and forced him to take a step back. You bitch. He hissed, holding both of his claws out. An orb of deep purple sludge materialized in the palm of his hands, oozing and dripping with a toxic substance as it expanded to the point where it overflowed out of his claws. Ciro Venenoso Grande. With a heavy grunt, Naruto threw the orb forward with reckless abandon. Akane stopped to stare at her mother with hopeful eyes, but when she didn't budge, a hurt look entered her face. She sidestepped to the right, not glancing at the orb as it splattered onto the ground of the rooftop, hissing and bubbling as it lingered there like a swamp. Naruto rushed forward, rigidly extending his arm with his elbow spike pointed out. He charged by Akane, before halting and changing direction, lashing out with a claw slash from his hidden arm as Akane avoided the potential impalement from Naruto's elbow spike. However, Naruto seemed to stand his ground far too easily, and as Akane rushed forward to meet him, he grinned a sinister grin. The ground where he had stepped created a splashing noise, like he was standing in some form of liquid. Akane caught what had happened just in time, and pulled back. Naruto had spread that venom upon the ground on purpose, and led the fight to that spot on the ground. In just barely preventing herself from stepping on the deadly poison, she had invariably left herself open. It was enough time for Naruto to launch 2 Ciros from his shoulder spikes without even charging them up, something that caught Akane off guard even further when he released them. Wait a minute, all this time it was necessary for him to charge up the energy to fire a Ciro. He's fired multiple Ciro at me, and nothing from them has indicated that he was able to do such a feat unless he was lulling me into that false assumption until now. The orange double Ciro engulfed Akane, and she called one of her mirrors to her immediately, putting it in front of her. However, the shield only ended up nullifying half of the damage, and she flopped to the ground, heavily burned in several places as she coughed up smoke. Apparently, seeing her daughter seriously injured was enough for Kushina. Bankai. Akashi no Hanawa. Kushina did not waste any time after her familiar cloak of blood surrounded her form. She called forth her blood sword, before she sped to her daughter's aid. Meanwhile, Taiki and Minato were not just sitting around watching the events unfold. Taiki in particular knew what had to be done. His Bankai was almost entirely defensive and support-based, the only form of attack coming from the sealed Zanpakuto he gained upon its release. However, it was situations like this that allowed his Bankai to thrive. The least he could do was aid in the defense of his more attack-oriented family. He charged his Ryatsu into one of his pillars, and the pointy tip emitted a stream of gray Ryatsu that formed small barriers around his other 3 non-hostile family members and himself. Ugh! Those annoying barriers again. Don't think this will be able to stand up to my creation. Naruto roared. Akane was still down for the count temporarily, but Naruto was setting his sights on her anyway. He leaped into the air, orienting his claw right leg downward, preparing to kick her in the head. However, Kushina flashed into the space between her older and younger children, her blood cloak pulsating. Her Tenbatsu would not work for her, she knew that, so she materialized her blood-coated sword. The metal glinted underneath the blood coating, and Kushina now wore a look of steely determination. So, you finally resigned yourself to fighting me. Good, leave the kitty crap emotions at home, he yelled, staring into the resolute eyes of Kushina as she readied her sword. There's got to be a way to bypass that ability of his. Minato thought, standing over to the side. He watched as Kushina battled with Naruto, as Akane was getting to her feet slowly. In addition to the bloody cloak that shielded Kushina from harm, the gray barrier courtesy of Taiki's Bankai added another layer of protection. She swung out with her sword in a sweeping motion, trying to clip off one of Naruto's conductors. Naruto was aware that a physical slice from Kushina's material blade would certainly slice it off, despite the fact that he would absorb the bloody Ryuryoku and gray barrier that protected her. The physical blow would still land a hit. The two of them danced in midair, using a shuanpa or sonito every second it seemed like, as one tried to outwit the other. Every time, Kushina would look to slice off Naruto's conductors, and it was a move that was getting somewhat predictable. He appeared behind her in a burst of shuanpa, but Kushina had reflexively turned her blade around so it was pointing behind her. Placing her other hand on the hilt, she swung with an incredible amount of force. Aiming her blade at anywhere else other than Naruto's conductors would be a wasted effort. However, Naruto saw through the attack before it even begun, and moved his body a step backwards in midair, with enough motion to ensure that he would not be injured by the blade. While it swung past, his claw shot out and grabbed the blade in mid-swing. Kushina had the decency to look surprised that he was fast enough to perform such a move, but it didn't stop there. Like clockwork, the gray barrier from Taiki's Bankai channeled through Naruto's conductors and into the spiral on his stomach. Once the gray energy had been drained, the blood mist followed, leaving nothing but a material blade that Naruto was grasping. "I've got it," Minato thought. While Kushina was still focused on Naruto, Minato moved his Bankai over to the still reeling Akane, who had climbed to her feet. "Akane, I have a plan. Your mother has figured out a way to bypass Naruto's creation." Akane was listening. "I have a theory as to why Naruto isn't able to absorb the Ryatsu contained within our physical blades. As you know, Ryatsu and Ryoryoku is what tempers our swords, and gives them power. However, it seems to be the case that Naruto's ability only allows him to absorb Ryoryoku from an outside source. The flesh of our bodies and the material of our blades give us an extra shield that he cannot absorb through. Attacks like Kido or my Bankai contain Ryoryoku out in the open air, which is the extent to which he can absorb, as compared to Ryoryoku contained within objects. If that's the case, then I assume that emitted Ryoryoku is fair game. What do you propose we do?" Akane replied. "Notice what your mother is doing when fighting him. She's using the barrier from Taiki and her own blood shield for extra defense. However, if she attacks, Naruto's creation will no doubt be absorbed. However, one thing he cannot absorb is the material blade beneath. He still takes damage even if he manages to absorb Kushina's defenses. That's how I plan to fight him, but I need your help. Conjure up several swords that can cut him from those mirrors of yours, and toss them into my cloud." Minato said. "Alright, but creating that many will take its toll on me," Akane said reluctantly. "What should I do after that?" "Help your mother and try to give me a clear shot at him." The wounded Akane walked forward, her Bankai mirror surrounding her as she held her special sword. "Give me 6 swords that can cut him." After she had materialized 6 swords, she handed them to her father, picked up her own special blue sword, and entered the fray alongside her mother. Minato shoved all 6 of the special swords into his cloud, waiting for the perfect opportunity. As long as Akane and Kushina were able to distract Naruto from close range, it didn't look like his Bankai would be in danger of being absorbed. The 5th Division's captain looked to the side. His son was already forming a new barrier for Kushina after it had been absorbed. Meanwhile, Naruto was getting more and more frustrated as the fight went on. Taiki was always recharging Kushina's gray barrier, and the blood cloak seemed to regenerate the moment he lost physical contact with her. Not to mention, the fact that she had a physical sword meant that he could tank attacks like he normally would, even if they were partially Ryoryoku based. Fuck. This fucking barrier. Naruto snarled, partially turning his attention away from Kushina. Taiki was about 25 feet from his position, and was seemingly protected within his gray, metal pillars. He was concentrating on keeping the barrier alive, so if Naruto could pick him off from here. He held out a right paw, his black claws tipped with orange Ryatsu. Aguja Kanina. All 5 of his claws shot out of the tips of his fingers, in a move that Naruto took from Grimjou's book. However, they soared through the air at a much faster rate, and they were tipped with a burning Ryoryoku. Taiki had noticed, putting himself behind the metal of his Bankai. "Like that'll protect you," Naruto screamed, thrusting his head forward. The black claw then impacted the first pillar, before exploding backward in a burst of orange energy. "Taiki!" Akane shouted, as the force from the attack threw the first and second of his pillars into the air like they were made of paper. Each of them burst into 2 separate parts and crashed uselessly to the ground 30 feet away from Taiki's position. Taiki stood in the center, still protected by his 2 remaining iron pillars, but he looked stunned. His royal guard Haori was in tatters, and he ripped it off to reveal the Shinigami robe underneath. Blood was trickling down his forehead, as it seemed he was not entirely unable to avoid the attack. The rest of his family breathed a sigh of relief, but Kushina took it to a whole different level, using the distraction caused by Naruto's pursuit of Taiki to press the attack. Too slow. Naruto shouted, backflipping over the fairly predictable strike to Naruto's right shoulder when Kushina charged at him with her Shuinpa. In that moment, Kushina had her back turned toward him, but the cloak of blood would give her at least a partial defense against many of his attacks. However, Naruto did not expect the silver flash of a blade, followed by his right shoulder conductor being lopped off near the root. The fragment of bone-like material clattered to the ground, and Naruto stared in bewilderment at his broken conductor. The stream of white Ryatsu-in was exposed, but he could no longer absorb any attacks with this one. A vein popped on his forehead as he finally realized that Akane had gotten into his blind spot, and her special sword was an apt enough tool to slice off his right conductor. Directly afterward, he saw another flash of silver enter his vision. "Ah, hell nah," he roared, throwing one of his tails outward to block the slash that would no doubt be directed at his remaining conductor. He stayed locked in that position for a few seconds, fanning out his other tails to block Kushina from stabbing him in the back. Yet with all that, he couldn't penetrate the barriers surrounding their bodies and blades. With only 2 pillars remaining, Taiki had diverted all of his power into creating barriers for Akane and Kushina, making them extra strong. Without them, Naruto could have easily been pushing them back. But with his barriers, and the loss of one of Naruto's conductors, the tables had turned and the Namikaze family was now winning the battle. "He's distracted. Now, Dad." "Yeah. Arai." Kushina and Akane abandoned ship the moment Minato spoke those words, and the sky was lit up with a blue light show. The gigantic blast of lightning soared over to Naruto, who was still reacting to both Akane and Kushina's movements. "Lightning? Bad plan. I still have one working conductor. Even if it takes longer, I can still nullify this attack." Naruto roaring, laughing at his family's apparent plan. True to his word, Naruto's remaining conductor began absorbing the blue lightning that had been fired from Minato's Bankai, laughing raucously as he channeled it into his body. However, a glimpse of about half a dozen shadows within the blast gave him pause. His eyes widened, but it was too little too late as he saw the 6 blades that were flying toward him, shrouded by the lightning blast that contained them. He put an arm up to block, but the first sword sliced right into him and buried itself into the flesh of his arm. In the span of about a second, the other 5 blades buried themselves into various parts of his torso, one of them even careening outward and clipping off his remaining conductor as it sailed by. Blood poured from the openings in his wounds, and he grit his teeth in pain. Normal swords like these shouldn't be able to penetrate his arrow, but something was making them work, because he now had 5 deep puncture wounds all across his body, with the sword sticking out of his body. "Wait a minute, these swords are identical to the one that she was using when she sliced off my conductor," he thought, turning his wounded gaze up to Akane. "Those swords somehow have the ability to cut me, and he fired them from his Bankai, so maybe she gave him these while I was distracted. Does he have any more?" Naruto collapsed to his knees, looking at his severed conductors. Without the ability to use his creation, he could only rely on physical abilities in his first release. He couldn't hope to defeat all 4 of them like that. Naruto wheezed on the ground, coughing up blood. When Akane said that she wished for a sword that could cut him, she really meant it. The wounds were far more serious than they looked. "It's over, Naruto. Please, stop this madness," Kushina said, pleading for one last chance for her son. "Tell us how to stop this dimensional teardown, before all of us suffer." Minato hovered his cloud over to the defeated Naruto's position, while Taiki and Akane themselves joined the rest of the family as they stood in a line over Naruto. "You can't hope to win this fight, Naruto. Just tell us how to reverse the process and we won't have to kill you," Minato said stonily, as Naruto choked up more blood. "Ha! Like the process could be reversed. And even if it was, like I'd tell you." Naruto cackled, to where Akane glared at him with barely restrained hatred. Mom, Dad, if what he's saying is true, then there's no redemption for this Arankar. We must kill him and find a way to reverse the dimensional merging process for all of Soul Society. A small smirk found its way onto Naruto's face as the rumbling of the dimension got heavier and heavier. The image in the sky had changed again. No longer was it a grassy field, but instead a set of very peculiar ruins. It looked like the ruins of a small city located in a forest. From the looks of things, it was uninhabited. The soul stream was pouring into it. This dimension is just about finished. The fight with all of my other Espada, and the dragged-out fight was enough time for this pocket dimension to be fully merged with the real world. The airspace around the rest of the surviving members of the Konoha Association was beginning to distort. Tsunade, Sarutobi, and Niji could no longer make out the distance and size of objects. "What's going on?" Tsunade asked. "The space, it's warping. The air is thinning. I can barely breathe." Tsunade wheezed as the dimensional space began to collapse upon them. Niji fell to his knees, holding a hand out in front of his face. It too was being warped, and so were the bodies of both his comrades, and the hollows that littered the landscape. The sky was as close as could possibly be without the dimensional space collapsing, and it reflected some kind of ruins within the real world. "That thing's a portal, right? I get the feeling we won't be safe for much longer if we stay here." Niji was cut off. They were all cut off, as the rumbling reached a climax. The dimension began to collapse on them fully, and when it overtook them, there was no pain, just blackness and unconsciousness. Naruto roared as he sprung to his feet, surprising all 4 members of the family with the ferocity of his life force. They leaped back, going on guard once again, but Naruto did not seem prepared to fight. He ripped a sword out of his left hip, throwing it to the ground as a splatter of blood erupted from where he had pulled it out. "Didn't I tell you all that this was a portal?" he snickered, pulling out another blade and letting it clatter to the floor. "Unfortunately, there's no more time to defeat you here. This world's on the brink of destruction." As he pulled out the last swords from his body, he crouched down and sprung into the air with all the leg strength he could muster, flying through the air like a rocket toward the portal. "This thing's basically a giant garganta. If you can get to it, you may be able to escape to the real world. It would be kinda nice to defeat you all instead of just letting the dimensional collapse kill you, so join me if you want to. Or, you can just stand right there and wait for death." "Ha ha ha," Naruto taunted, bursting up through the portal as it rippled to accommodate his entrance. "Wait! Get back here!" Akane roared at the sky, but Naruto was already gone. "Stop it, Akane!" Minato ordered, his captain's Haori fluttering in the breeze as the world began to warp further. If what he said is true, then this dimension is done for. He may have been taunting us, but if we want to survive and stop him, we will have to follow him into the real world. But what about Soul Society? What about our comrades? Taiki roared, taking the stand with his sister. "We have to believe in them, you too. Trust that they'll find safe passage to escape. But for right now, we must stop Naruto at all costs." He paused for effect, letting the tension linger on the air. "I suppose this is again my fault for letting it get out of hand again. If we had just struck him down there instead of trying to reason with him, all would not be lost. But, stopping Naruto should be our first cost. As much as it pains me to say, he has the ability to do untold amounts of destruction to the real world." Akane and Taiki turned away from the father. "Fine," they whispered, before Minato and Kushina nodded solemnly. At the same time, the 4 of them burst into the air similar to Naruto, passing through the clear world just as it died for good. A calm, peaceful breeze overcame Minato's senses as he emerged on the other side of the portal. It was strange, the blue skies and clear weather of the real world would be almost welcoming presence if not for the dire situation at hand. The portal was not visible from this side of the realm, but from the way they came through, it was still there hanging above the sky in the real world. Minato's hand found his wife's. Akane and Taiki were beside them. The air around them rushed as they descended to Earth. The ruined city they had seen in the portal was right below, and they could clearly make out the ruined buildings surrounded by a multitude of both dead and living trees. The family touched down upon the ground, seemingly wary of the fact that nothing seemed to be going on within the real world yet. There were no hollow, or really anything to indicate that Soul Society and Huecomundo existed in the real world. Why does this place seem so familiar? Kushina thought, looking around at the ruined buildings. They were in an architectural style that looked like a more advanced Rukongai, but in spite of that they were similar. The figure standing before them on top of the largest tower in the city cleared his throat and laughed suddenly. Naruto was sitting upon the top of the building, looking down upon them as his claws fiddled with the chipping red paint of the building. He was still in his resurrection. The Spirit King's dimension is really nothing more than a pocket dimension where the Spirit King lives. It's no surprise that it would be the first to merge to the real world. He got to his feet. So, you decided to join me here, after all? Smart choice, considering you would die if you had stayed behind, and I get to kill you myself. Though, I have to wonder what would happen to all those friends you left behind, he hissed, a small smile on his face. We came here to stop you, Naruto. You would be a menace to the denizens of the real world if you are allowed to roam free. Surely you don't think you can win against all four of us? Just because you changed the setting means nothing, we have already defeated you before. Minato explained. Naruto seemed unnaturally calm, he was even hiding his face from view. I will admit I'm not really good enough right now to beat all four of us, but don't worry, that will change soon enough. He paused for a moment, looking at the symbol on the building. It's beautiful that we would end up here, a place I destroyed a long time ago. You know, this entire continent was hidden by a massive genjutsu, so the rest of the real world doesn't know about it. Even the Seirete only discovered it a few centuries back. Nature's begun to take over, but don't tell me you haven't recognized this place, he said, smirking. What place? What's he talking about? What's so special about here? Taiki asked. He and Akane were truly confused, but Minato and Kushina squinted their eyes, and they paled. They saw the tower for what it really was, the faded symbol of the Hai no Kuni plastered near the top. Behind the grinning Naruto, they saw possibly the only same feature in the village, the monument with 6 faces of the Hokages carved into stone. So, you get it now. Naruto roared. He shrouded himself with orange Ryatsu, to the point where it was the same orange sludge that was falling off of him when he released his Zanpakuto. He crossed his claws. Resurrección, segunda etapa. Resurrección, segunda etapa. At that moment, everything went to hell. The world practically exploded into orange as the storm of Ryatsu extended out from Naruto, bathing the world in the dull color of his Ryatsu. The plants started rustling as the Ryatsu overtook them, and it seemed the sky was bleeding orange with the color display that lit it up. The Namikaze family was breathing heavily from the sheer force of the Ryatsu, but oddly enough, both Minato and Kushina did not seem concerned with its power. Instead, their eyes were focused on something else, the carved stone monuments of the Hokages. This is Konoha? Kushina asked tentatively. The place was a wreck, the buildings were falling into serious disrepair, clearly uninhabitable. But what was more concerning is that there was no life to be found anywhere within the village. It was a desolate ghost town, and there weren't even birds nesting in whatever trees were still alive. Both Minato and Kushina knew that Naruto was the one who had destroyed Konoha, but they hadn't expected people to not move into the abandoned ruins. The ninja world seemed to have lost its way of ninja a long time ago, with Konoha's collapse unbalancing the power. Konoha? Akane asked, a shocked expression on her face. You mean this ruined place is your home village? The one that everyone came from? I know you said it was destroyed, but I guess I just didn't expect to be dumped out here in the real world. I'm not sure Naruto feels the same way. This place may be a hotbed for spiritual activity though, seeing as that's why Karakura Town was displayed not too long ago. Perhaps that's also why Konoha got displayed afterwards. We don't really have time to think about it. Look. Taiki's words seemed to jolt the remaining family members back to reality, and to the vortex of Ryatsu that was once Naruto. Like with his first release, Naruto stood within a storm of Ryatsu that may have reached out to the very ends of the village in its power. Like an egg, there was a shell of Ryatsu protecting a silhouette within it all, and even though the family couldn't see Naruto's features change within the cloud, they could feel his power grow even further. The torrent of Ryatsu did not linger as long this time. It was dispelled relatively quickly, leaving nothing but the stillness of the destroyed village. Plus the monstrous figure standing on the Hokage tower. Minato could only stare. Akane almost dropped her sword. The thing that stood there before them resembled the Arrancar from before in shape, but in this form, there was something so wrong about it. Naruto stood on the rooftop looking down upon them, but the first thing Minato wondered was if the Primera was actually able to view them in that state. After all, it was difficult to see without any eyes. The abomination leaped off of his perch, floating down to land upon the ground, and the family gawked when they saw the new Naruto for the first time. They didn't even know if they could call this a hollow anymore. Not everything was different from his first release. He was still vaguely vulpine-shaped, and was still covered from head to toe in armor. However, the hollow plating was a much deeper red, verging on almost black. His hollow mask was exactly the same as in his first release, from the teeth covering his upper lip, to the eyepiece that extended into fox-like ears. However, there were also plenty of key differences. There were many more spikes littering his body in addition to the 2 conductors on his shoulder that had apparently been regenerated once he entered his second release. A quick glance at his tails would show the pincer-like appendages to be coated with no less than dozen small spikes on each one, down to the very tips. Out of the back of his now completely black hands and claws protruded 2 more spikes out of each one, and the prickly weapons could be seen lining his arms all the way to his shoulders. The same white vortex was pulsating where his seal used to be, yet it seemed livelier as it crackled with white energy. His shoulder spikes were crackling with the same energy. The most striking thing about him would be his face, however. The parts that were uncovered by his mask was a sickly pale, clammy to the touch and with the consistency of rotting flesh. His eyes were 2 empty-looking abyssal holes in his head, to which Minato wondered if they had melted away when he had transformed. When the 5th Division captain stared into them, it was like his life force was being sucked from him, and a deep fear overtook him. Those eyes weren't like hollow holes. He could not see through to the other side of the Arrancar. Like a hideous infection, Naruto's eyes were endlessly oozing a strange liquid. It ran down his face in twin rivulets, streaming down his cheeks and dripping off his chin. From the looks of things, the rim of both his eyes were splattered with the liquid, creating a repulsive ring around the bottomless pits. It was almost like splattered blood left over when his eyes were ripped out. The hollow opened his mouth to let out a heavy sigh, and Minato realized in disgust that his eyes weren't the only things leaking that disgusting liquid. As soon as he opened his mouth, the viscous orange liquid burst from his mouth, dribbling off his chin with the other streams. When he looked at Naruto's enormous hollow hole, it too was leaking the liquid in a much thicker stream down his torso, where it seemed to mix with the vortex on his stomach. Minato's trained eyes picked up on the color of the thick liquid leaking from many areas of Naruto's body. It was orange. Wait, orange? If I recall correctly, orange is the color of Naruto's Ryatsu. Whenever he decides to release, it's always the same shade of orange as that liquid. Which means... As he stared into Naruto's eyes, he realized that what Naruto's eyes were leaking was pure Ryuryoku. And yet, that didn't make any sense. Ryuryoku was always in a plasma state, which was how it manifested when it left their bodies. Yet, Naruto's body was somehow exuding liquid Ryuryoku. He had changed the state of matter for pure Ryuryoku, which was an absurdity in and of itself. So, who wants me to take their soul first? Naruto asked, staring them down with the empty sockets that he called eyes. His voice gave Minato the chills. Naruto's normal voice was worked into what seemed to be several other voices all as one. Akane raised her sword, and Minato could tell she was feeling less confident than before. With that in mind, he decided to take action. Taiki, form the strongest barriers you can with your Bankai and protect all of us. Akane, form a special sword that can cut him from your own Bankai. Kushina, come with me and press the attack. We may be in a different setting, and he may have gotten stronger, but we haven't lost yet. This is not our son. We owe it to the real world to take down whatever this thing is. Minato barked, ordering his family into line. He was steadfast in his approach, and with Naruto's new appearance, he could definitively call the creature before him something far separate from family. Minato's orders seemed to break the rest of the family from their stunned stupor, and they swerved into action. Taiki surrounded himself with his 2 remaining pillars, and Akane conjured up a single blade which she tossed to Minato. The man himself was controlling his Bankai from afar, though he knew only physical attacks with a material blade were likely to work on Naruto. Naruto himself grinned, showing serrated orange teeth that had been stained with the liquid. His family was preparing to fight him, and looked like they were going to try and kill him for real. And yet, with the same strategy they had used before. His tails were bristling with excitement, and he looked at the pincer-like ends of them. Let's see how long the 4 of you can last. In this state, the longer you take, the lower your chances of survival. Naruto thought deviously, flashing out of existence with the rushing static sound of a sonido. He reappeared between the group, but did not attack. Kushina let a look of fear enter her face when her son fixated her with his empty eye sockets, and attacked out of desperation and despair. In front of Naruto, all her experience as a Shinigami and all of her training to become a captain meant nothing. She attacked with a reckless swing, intent on taking Naruto's head without a second thought, with no regard for restraint or defense. And of course, her blade was coated with both Taiki's gray barrier and her own blood shield. She was no longer aiming for Naruto's conductors, instead for just any wound. Faster than her blade could move, Naruto pivoted backwards to avoid the full brunt of Kushina's strike, before shifting forward to catch just the tip of the blade as it grazed him across the chest, creating a very small cut. More importantly, the gray barriers and the blood shield both channeled into Naruto's newly reformed conductors, leaving Kushina with just a blade for a couple seconds. The feeling gave both Naruto and the Namake's family a sense of déjà vu. Minato noted with interest the fact that Naruto had perfectly shifted his body forward to catch just a slight cut from Kushina. The important thing for him was apparently contact with Kushina's Ryu-Ryoku, and the ability to absorb it. Yet, in their previous battle, he had gone out of his way to avoid every single attack. Absorbing Ryatsu with his creation was just a failsafe in case he got hit. The fight continued despite Minato's analysis, but Naruto seemed genuinely happy as the energy from Kushina's attack channeled into the conductors on his shoulders. Unlike his first form, where the spiral stayed the same, this time the energy glowed brighter as he absorbed the Ryu-Ryoku. It was swirling faster now, and had turned into a bright shade of yellow. There was a strange hissing noise that lingered in the air, before Naruto's grin split even wider, showing his orange teeth. There was then a sound like a fire that had just been lit and a blinding light. When the noise subsided, Naruto looked behind himself. Of his 9 spiked tails, the first one on the very left end was now lit with an orange Ryu-Ryoku glow at the end of its tip. In my segunda etapa, I'm the master of all Ryu-Ryoku. Naruto guffawed, pointing his right index claw at the 4 family members. Before they had any time to react, he fired. Primer, 0. The orange beam was fired from the tip of his claw. It was an ordinary 0. It also managed to destroy 2 city blocks when he fired it in a straight path, engulfing all 4 family members in the blast. Ha! You like that? That's just the beginning. We'll see if you'll be able to make it to the end. Naruto taunted, the one lit tail twirling behind him. He sped away, charging orange Ryatsu into his hands. He reappeared before Minato, giving him a quick palm thrust before flashing away from the counter that his father would no doubt give him. Unfortunately for Minato, Taiki had protected all 4 of them from the previous 0 with a barrier, but through Naruto's palm thrust, Minato had made contact with Naruto, and the gray barrier had disappeared. Minato grunted, the wind knocked out of him. Even with the barrier, Naruto's physical attacks were nothing to scoff off, hence the reason they couldn't afford to have Taiki take down the barriers. Without those barriers, just one physical attack from Naruto would likely kill any one of them. Akane seemed to snap out of her stupor as this point, the mirrors surrounding her now shining with an ethereal force. She and Minato locked eyes, and a mutual understanding seemed to fall over them both. Akane, he whispered in her ear as he stood next to her. Isn't there any way your Bankai's power can nullify the creation? He asked in a low tone. Akane looked thoughtful for a moment. Just because I'm in my Bankai doesn't mean I can wish for something and it will automatically come true, you know that. I'm pretty much limited to enhancing my own abilities. Commands that take away powers or have an effect on the surrounding atmosphere are off limits. This is truly an interesting conversation you all are having. Do you mind if I join in? What? Where did he come from? Akane barked, as she and her father reflexively moved back to put distance between themselves and Naruto. The Primera had somehow flashed right between them, without it even looking like he used Sonido. Give me a wakizashi that will kill him. Akane roared, as she skid back on her heels. That was truly pushing the limit of her Bankai's power, but the wakizashi she pulled from one of her mirrors seemed to indicate it was possible. It would kill him if struck. A command like that took a lot of Ryuryoku, as she could clearly tell from the amount of Ryatsu that was contained within the knife. Any less Ryatsu, and it would be unable to kill him. She hefted the small sword over her shoulder, throwing it with as much strength as she could muster, which by Shinigami standards was pretty damn fast. It was almost at point-blank range, but Naruto easily saw the attack coming. However, instead of dodging the attack, he charged up his Ryatsu to his maximum capacity the moment she threw it. The same liquid orange substance that leaked from his orifices surrounded him in a dome of pure power. When the wakizashi impacted it, it was instantaneously dissolved, from the metal blade down to the hilt. Unfortunately, I still cannot draw Ryuryoku from physical objects, but who's to say I can't melt down their physical containers and take the leftover energy? The Ryatsu torrent that was Naruto spoke. The orange dome of energy overtook the leftover red Ryuryoku that remained from Akane's wakizashi, adding the energy to itself. After that was finished, Naruto dropped his Ryatsu to a more sustainable level, but the vortex on his stomach was now a much duller yellow. 2 more tails had been lit up with the same orange glow on their tips, giving him a total of 3 activated tails. Damn it, Akane! Look at what you did! His Ryatsu's even stronger now. Taiki called out, forming another layered barrier around each of his family members once he knew the magnitude of Naruto's Ryatsu. What he didn't expect was for Naruto to come after him directly after, slashing one of his remaining pillars into a dozen slices with his Ryatsu-laden claws. Taiki couldn't afford to lose his last pillar, or else his Bankai would be completely void in the face of Naruto. He focused his gray Ryuryoku into a barrier, surrounding both himself and the last pillar in his signature barrier. Stop it, Taiki! That barrier's just asking to be absorbed. Minato yelled at his son, rushing into action. Kushina took a position right next to Akane, who regarded her mother with a solemn smile. Honey, you produced a wakizashi that you claimed would without a doubt kill him, right? Can you do something like that on a bigger scale? We need to come up with a plan. Well, that last wakizashi uses up a lot of Ryuryoku to make it work. To answer your question, I can do something like that on a larger scale with my remaining power. I can basically make 3 giant blades extend from the mirrors with the full command to kill. But, these blades are large, to contain the amount of Ryatsu within them. I can't fire them off right now, as we'll all get caught in the crossfire, including myself. I need to set up crystal mirrors at specific points to accommodate the size of these blades, and after I use my attack, all of my Ryuryoku will be drained. It's doubtful that Naruto's just going to let you set up this attack. Kushina muttered, watching Minato try to deliver a strike with his sword to Naruto in an attempt to distract him from Taiki. If I can get you and Dad to keep him busy while I put the mirrors in their right positions, I should be able to pull this off. Ha! Like a mother would need any more motivation to give a future to her children. If this is our best chance, then I would gladly put my body on the line for it. Akane gave a tearful nod at her mother, before she used Shuinpa to move away from battlefield, her mirrors following her. Kushina breathed a sigh of relief. Naruto hadn't noticed her leave yet. Meanwhile, Naruto's claws were pitted against Minato's blade, while Taiki just stood within his Bankai conjuring more barriers for whenever Minato would lose them to Naruto's creation. Naruto blocked a thrust with his forearm spikes, losing a couple of them in the process. Minato was taking a page out of Kushina's book earlier, going directly for his conductors. "Hey, Dad." The abomination known as Naruto spoke in his several voices. It still made Minato shudder. "Don't you think you ought to try a new fighting style? I've absorbed several of those barriers already, and you can probably tell by now that it may be too late," Naruto mockingly advised. "I don't have much of a choice, now do I? Without those barriers, you would have destroyed my sword and killed me by now with one of your palm thrusts," Minato snarled. Naruto laughed. "I guess it's true, you need an entire barrier over you at all times if you want to fight me. But, shouldn't you know by now that if it gets too far, you're gonna die? I'm not saying this because I want to kill you, I'm stating an objective fact." He paused for just a second. "You can feel it, can't you? I'm stronger than when you first fought me. Not just when I was in my first release, but even from the time I just had gone into my resurrection, Segunda Etapa. That's what my enhanced creation does in this state. It awakens my tails, and with each subsequent one, I become stronger. By the time my ninth and final tail is awakened, I become what is known as El Hueco Perfecto, and what that means." Naruto paused. "Is all four of you are dead?" Naruto broke contact with Minato. "It seems hopeless, doesn't it? The way you're fighting me only takes away what little time you have left. You keep providing me Ryuryoku for my powered-up form, all the while trying to protect this liability over here." Naruto cackled. That did it. A mid-level had his spell went bursting at Naruto, who absorbed it easily while still grinning at his father. Minato looked surprised at his son, who was wearing a look of anger and disdain. There was a burst of light, and Naruto's fourth tail lit up orange as his vortex turned the same shade. Taiki was standing outside of his Bankai, leaving himself fully unprotected in case Naruto decided to strike. "What are you doing, Taiki? You can't just fire Kido at him. That's a pointless waste that will only make stronger." Minato shouted at his son, who pointedly ignored him. "I am not a liability," Taiki punctuated, and to top it all off, he released what remained of his Bankai, the giant iron pillar reforming into his Shirkai. The gray barriers that were surrounding the family disappeared. And with his Shirkai reformed, Taiki swung it down upon Naruto. "Stop it, Taiki! Can't you see he's just trying to goad you?" Minato cried, but he was pushed back by the strong Ryatsu that both combatants were emitting. The second Namikaze's son didn't seem to care how his brother was now a liquid Ryuryoku leaking monstrosity. The force he attacked him with was enough to create a crater wide enough to swallow several ruined buildings. Naruto didn't even flinch, even when blood ran down from his forehead into his empty eye sockets. Without saying a word, he disappeared with a quick sonido, appearing behind Taiki. The youngest Namikaze held his club across his shoulder, careful not to use any Kido that Naruto could absorb. Naruto's claws impacted with the iron of his club, but Taiki pushed out enough Ryatsu to prevent the Aaron-Car was piercing directly through it. Too late. Naruto's right conductor was being charged with energy, and Taiki's eyes were drawn to the vortex in his stomach. The symbol was glowing brighter, and the four activated tails of Naruto had small wisps of Ryuryoku rising from the tips, flowing like a stream into the sky. Quarto Zero. Naruto's Ryuryoku was hissing again, and the power of his newest Zero obliterated 4 city blocks, throwing the remains in the air as if they were nothing more than refuse. And Taiki was caught up in the middle of it. "Taiki!" Minato couldn't rush to his son's aid immediately, seeing as the Zero had such a large width that Minato himself was almost engulfed in it all, despite being relatively safe over to the side. That entire thing still was nothing more than a normal Zero. The ray of light subsided, showing the destruction it had left in its wake. Taiki flopped out into the open, charred and black as he coughed up smoke. He stood his ground, looking defiant despite his body's condition. That decision cost him dearly. Trying to fight me with just your shuriken is a decision that will cost you your life. Naruto howled. He thrust his right claw out, palms upward and fingers curled as if he were clutching a baseball. No, wait! Minato cried, but he couldn't react in time. The instance where Naruto held his hand up and the deadly Ryuryoku attack rose from the ground happened in barely a second. It was too quick for anyone to do anything, even for Taiki to do something as simple as moving. Rija. There was no other prerequisite to Naruto's attack, and Taiki could never expect the thin, laser-like lines of Ryuryoku to materialize in almost every direction. They emerged from both the air and the ground as they extended vertically and horizontally in every direction, making escape virtually impossible for the general area. Taiki roared in anger as he was first impaled through by one of the thin beams. He dropped his shuriken, hearing it clatter to the ground beyond an entanglement of beams. After that, he felt several more beams put more holes in his body, and he knew that if he didn't get out, he was going to turn into a honeycomb quickly. He looked up weakly, seeing the impossibility of escape. The attack pattern was set up like a grid, beams in all directions with only thin gaps that he was unable to slip through. Naruto grinned a stained smile as he retracted his hand, and the grid-like array of beams disappeared, but not without leaving no less than a dozen holes in Taiki's body. The entire spectacle had only taken a few seconds, which explained how Minato only got there to help his son after the damage had already been done. Taiki collapsed into the village dirt, desperately reaching for his shuriken, but to no avail. Naruto watched the scene with a small smile. He had hit Taiki in several internal organs. Don't bother. I hit both of his lungs with that attack. Even if I hadn't hit him there, he's filled with more than enough holes to make it fatal. That liability is gonna die. Minato ignored Naruto, kneeling at his son's side. Blood had already collected into a generous puddle from the collective impact of all the holes he had in him. Dad! Please, just stop him. Taiki croaked, before his head flopped lifelessly forward. There was no big speech, no final touching scene between father and son, and few words exchanged. Namikaze Taiki died. It was as simple as that. Ragrik! Naruto roared, using the opening creating in Taiki's death to attack his emotionally distraught father. Minato didn't say a word, as if he weren't even giving Naruto the satisfaction. However, he kicked his sword to his other hand, before slinging it over his shoulder to block the claw strike from Naruto before spinning around while countering. When Naruto looked at his father's face, it was even stonier than normal, but the main difference was that Minato was not even saying a single word to him now. He didn't even show anger over his son's death, even though Naruto could register the turmoil that lay within. It was taking all he had to hold back the mercilessly strong Arankar. The sword that Akane gave him didn't exactly give him any new defensive abilities. The only thing it could do is cut. Hey, Dad! I have a secret. You wanna know what it is, don't ya? Don't ya? Don't ya? Naruto roared, laughing at his own stupid jokes. Minato of course, did not respond. Instead, he opted to go for a slash at Naruto's right conductor, and to his surprise, Naruto let him. He really should have been more wary when he saw Naruto's eyeless face split into a disturbing large, oozing grin. After that, he laughed, flinging orange Ryuryoku spittle right into Minato's face. That premonition came true when he saw Ryuryoku being pulled from the blade that Minato was using. Like always, it was being channeled into Naruto's body. You really shoulda waited for my explanation. When I hit 4 tails, I have enough strength to begin drawing Ryuryoku from my opponent's weapons, though only if you touch my conductors with them. Minato waved the sword Akane gave him in front of his face, feeling out the weightlessness that came from a Ryatsule's sword. This thing was near useless now, even if it was imbued with the power to cut Naruto. He cast it aside, mulling his options as Naruto gave him a lazy look. Where the hell were Kushina and Akane? He could sense their Ryatsu moving around various spots in the village. Were they planning something? He still had his Bankai out and hovering over to the side, but both his Shurikai and Bankai could be readily absorbed by Naruto's creation. He could absorb Ryuryoku in the open air if it so much as touched his body, and from objects like weapons if it touched his conductors. Kido was useless, his Zanpakuto was useless, and Hakuda would just be a waste of time. Naruto was literally impossible to fight at the moment. If he could find Akane. He wasn't running away, he was making a tactical retreat. It wasn't like running away permanently was possible. He had to find Kushina and Akane and regroup. Without Taiki though, their chance of victory just lowered significantly. Naruto was slowly moving toward him, but Minato was one step ahead, disappearing with his fastest Chuinpa. Naruto made an annoyed sound, his multiple voices making it sound like a cross between a hiss and a growl. Minato could outlast him for so long with that head start, he knew that his Sonido was faster. He disappeared, giving chase to the man who was heading in the direction of the female Namikaze family members. Naruto seemed to notice this, and the fact caused the temperamental Arrancar's mood to uplift again. The two of them surged through the south block of the village to the ruined main gates, where Kushina and Akane were setting up their master plan, unbeknownst to Naruto. Both girls were surprised when Minato appeared before them in a flash of Chuinpa, looking battered, and wearing the stony expression that had not left his face ever since Taiki drew his last breath. Minato! Where were you all this time? We thought you were. Taiki is dead. Kushina's breath was caught hitched in her throat, and she made a pathetic murmuring noise as the sentence died on her lips. Akane too looked shocked, but when she couldn't feel his Ryatsu anymore, she had no reason to doubt her father. No. Taiki's twin said. The normally aloof and short-tempered Akane almost fell to her knees, and would have if her father didn't catch her before she fell. I know how upset you both must be, but we can mourn him later. Once we defeat Naruto, we can cry ourselves to exhaustion. But for now, Naruto is still out there. Minato said, drying his daughter's eyes as a single tear fell out of each one. I understand, but Mom and myself have been setting up what may be the best chance to defeat him. The normally spunky Akane said, in a much more reserved and sullen tone. Minato had noticed that there was only one red crystal mirror hovering around Akane's body, but it wasn't until that moment that he chose to comment on it. Akane, where is the rest of your Bankai? Akane smiled weakly. While you were keeping Naruto busy, both of us were moving throughout the area to set up our trap. My other two mirrors are set up at adjacent positions throughout the village. If I put all my power into it, I should be able to create 3 necessarily large blades that if successful will undoubtedly kill him. In its own way, you and Taiki have managed to distract him long enough for me to set it up. The problem now is getting Naruto in the correct position. By triangulating the exact area, the point where the blades will meet is the exact center of the village, directly where we first met. The bad timing is that Naruto will surely follow us out here. We have to force him back into the center of the village. Once in the right spot, I can activate my trap. Once they were done talking, the figure of Naruto appeared via Sonido about 20 feet ahead of him, staring them down intently. Found you, he saw him. The more tails he had activated, the stronger he gets. He is at 4 tails right now, and has gained the power to sap Ryuryoku from her swords should they touch his conductors, Minato said, briefing both his wife and daughter. Force him to the center of the village, even if you have to make him stronger. Just move him there. This is our final shot, she said. Give me 3 swords that will cut him and his attacks, she ordered, as 3 identical blades appeared from her final mirror, before she left it in its designated spot. This is all I can do. I will need all my remaining Ryuryoku to issue a command of this magnitude. Make sure you don't lose these, she said, handing a sword to each of her parents. Kushina, keep your blood barrier up at all times. Your Tenbatsu may be useful in this situation, if it forces him to move. Minato said. You don't have to tell me twice. Tenbatsu. Minato and Akane looked surprised as Kushina summoned the giant tidal wave of blood, which she then hurled at Naruto. The Primera grinned, but Minato was delighted to note that the wave was so strong that he instinctively moved back a city block, even if the attack was harmless. The Tenbatsu lapped at his feet, and the eyeless Arrancar grinned as his body went to work absorbing the bloody attack. There was another crash, and the abomination's fifth tail lit up orange. His body was getting bulkier, and Minato noticed the subtle increase in spikes as he absorbed more power. Not to mention, even those metal-looking spikes were dripping with liquid Ryuryoku now, the same substance that was dribbling out from his eyes and mouth. Quinto, Zero. The same normal Zero that Naruto fired from the tip of his claw burst forth, screeching with power and carving up a trench in the old dirt streets of the village. Allow me. Minato stepped forward after uttering those words, trusting in the power of Akane's special swords. With precision only a captain could achieve, he cut the Zero into 4 separate parts in a flash, breathing heavily as they passed harmlessly over his family and destroyed the old village gates behind them. Naruto's grin widened. Zero Aguja. While still bursting forward after being cut, small needles of orange Ryuryoku burst from the main body of the Zero like raindrops, falling in every which way against the family. All 3 of them whipped their swords around at every which angle, blocking needles upon reflex. Minato took a couple of them in the knee, noting with great interest on how they resembled Senbon, though the effectiveness of them was much increased, and he couldn't pull them out. Kushina took the lead from that point, her blood shield allowing her to nullify every Aguja while Akane and Minato languished while trying to avoid them. She sped towards Naruto, thrusting forth with a quick flurry of jabs. Naruto recognized the special sword and how she was not going for his conductors. He backpedaled closer and closer to the center of the village, leaping over a ruined stall as Kushina slashed her sword strong enough to create a razor wind that sliced into the dirt road. He's getting closer. We just need a little more to get him directly in the middle. Akane whispered to her father. Minato scratched his chin. His Bankai had been following him around, but until now, he hadn't dared to use it. I have an attack that will push him back farther, but it won't be able to harm him. In fact, I can't really use this as much more than a distraction. I need you to go help your mother and try to push him back while he's trying to absorb it. Minato said, climbing onto his Bankai cloud. Akane took off, speeding into the battlefield after her mother, who was back to fighting with her sword instead of the blood that accompanied her Bankai. Her Tenbatsu had subsided, meaning it was now safe to enter the vicinity. Minato lagged behind, far enough out of range to where Naruto wouldn't focus on him, but close enough to launch his attack. Naruto growled when he noticed Akane enter the field, after dodging a flurry of strikes from Kushina. While she was reeling and focusing on her next attack, he grasped his hands together as if he were holding a baseball, swinging his arms out and letting out a stream of Ryatsu. The wave of concentrated Ryuryoku was really nothing more than a feeble attempt at an attack, and both Akane and Kushina sidestepped it fairly easily. Naruto backflipped over the pincer attack wrought by the 2 women, and the ruined central plaza with the Hokage tower behind it was less than a city block away. Kushina and Akane locked blades, frowning slightly when they realized that they missed their target. They were giving Naruto the silent treatment just like Minato, clearly in memoriam for the fallen Taiki. No one was giving him the satisfaction, but Naruto didn't even seem to care. However, Naruto began to get suspicious when he saw that Akane and Kushina were backing off for just a moment. They stepped away, standing about 10 feet away from each other. Naruto's eyes widened slightly as he saw his father standing by the ruined village gates on his Bankai cloud. He could feel the strength of his Ryatsu rise, and a split second later the man fired an intense bolt of Arai straight at him. Naruto dodged on instinct, forgetting that his creation would render the attack useless. He moved back and to the left, but did not expect another beam to rocket forth down the road to Akane's right, identical to the first blast. He was absorbing the blast with his creation, but the combination of instinct and the force from the attack was moving Naruto back further and further. As he moved closer to the center of the village, he was hit by another blast which was on the opposite site of the original, his conductors absorbing the Ryuryoku without fail. As he stepped on the Leaf Village's symbol in the center of the village, his sixth and seventh tails lit up orange, and the vortex on his stomach turned a deep red. Akane's heart nearly burst out of her chest as she saw Naruto step foot on the designated point. He was smiling his abominable smile at all of them as his eyeless gaze peered into their soul, but he wasn't moving. Minato flashed into existence right beside both women, and all three family members nodded to each other, stepping into view of Naruto. Well, looks like the man of the house finally decided to stop hiding. "Tell me, what the fuck do you plan to do now?" he asked, to which Minato spared a shifty glance at Akane. "Give me 3 long extendable blades that will kill this Aaronkar," she commanded. She had already set up the trap, so it was unnecessary for her to be touching her Bankai. All she had to do was say the command. "Ha!" Naruto said, confused. "Are you doing something? Because nothing's happening. Come to think of it, there is pretty much nothing you can even do at this point. My creation can pretty much nullify all of your attacks, so I guess I don't even need to become El Hueco Perfecto in the first place. Now." He stepped forward, forming a spear of Ryuryoku. "Who wants to die first?" he asked, before he frowned when he heard a whistling noise from an unknown source. "What the?" Naruto roared, as he was beset upon by 3 massive blue blades that extended toward him from 3 different directions. The extension was similar to Ikamaru Jin's Shurikai, but it was far, far faster and the blades were much, much larger. "Wait, these swords," Naruto managed to get out as he recognized Akane's Ryatsu. The heavy swords extended from the 3 mirrors that had been set up for this trap, closing in on the position where they would meet, with Naruto in the middle of it all. Naruto cried out as the first one impacted him, followed by other 2 shortly after. He looked at his 3 family members, mad-eyed and insane, as if he were accusing them of something. They looked on without saying a word, but they seemed to feel a vague sense of accomplishment. "Our last shot worked, Akane," Minato said. "Fuck you," Naruto growled, putting a claw on one of the blades. The family breathed a sigh of relief, as they saw Naruto was not moving anymore. "It's over. It's finally over," Minato said, embracing his wife. He missed Naruto's lips moving. "Suerte siete." The remaining members of the Namikaze family stood there, looking sullen as the 3 blades set up from Akane's trap impaled their fallen son and brother. It had to be done, to prevent the destruction of the real world. "It's over. It's finally over. We did it," Minato said. They had saved the real world from succumbing to Naruto's power. He should have felt happy in any other circumstance. So, why didn't he? Suerte siete. No. That one thought of Minato's seemed to be shared by the other 2 members of his family, and they shared in his dejected bewilderment as they all heard Naruto's voice ring out. Akane in particular looked the most surprised. She had seen her surefire kill swords impact his body. She fell to her knees, a hopeless look plastered across her face. She no longer had enough strength to fight, and could no longer use her Bankai with the amount of Ryuryoku she had left. Minato saw how he had survived. The blades had not pierced through Naruto's body at all. Instead, they were pressing harmlessly against a orange Ryuryoku shield that was wrapped around Naruto's body. The Aaronkar himself was unharmed. "I guess you could call that a good plan. You timed it perfectly. I had no idea I was being lured here to this spot. Yet, the reason you failed to kill me is that you didn't understand that I can create barriers as well." Naruto wryly placed a claw on the back end of the first massive blade touching his shield, before he released the Suerte siete. It conglomerated into small orbs, which then shot off like comets at the family, creating a hailstorm of Ryatsu as they cratered the village square. Minato grabbed the stunned Akane, moving them both out of the way of the wretched hailfire. Kushina didn't need help getting out of the way, she was already at a safe distance. It was at that point that Minato realized why Naruto had dropped his shield. The Arrancar was moving the first blade up to his right conductor, and Minato thought back to when Naruto had sucked the Ryuryoku clean from his own sword. As soon as Naruto touched the blade to his conductor, it went to work, sucking out the massive pool of Ryuryoku from the long blade. To be imbued with the power to kill something like this, Akane must have put so much Ryatsu into the blade. Now, their trap had proven to be their undoing, because Naruto now had access to that wealth of power. When the conductor finished absorbing the Ryuryoku, Naruto locked his eyeless gaze upon all of them. Minato felt like a stone had been dropped into his stomach when he heard two loud noises, followed by two brief consecutive flashes of light. Naruto's 8th and 9th tails had been lit with the orange glow on their tips, and were now awakened. The vortex on his stomach was now a pitch black, not rotating at all. El Hueco Perfecto. Naruto whispered. The battlefield was silent. Minato was expecting a grand display of Ryatsu from Naruto, followed by a powerful attack that they would be hard-pressed to avoid. That was how the other tales had progressed, and how the family had fought up to this point. To his surprise, there was nothing. Minato couldn't even feel Naruto's suffocating Ryatsu anymore. It was like it just ceased to exist. Naruto wasn't smiling. Instead, he was casting his eyeless gaze upon all three of them, as if he were a predator deciding which prey he should go after first. Yes. I think I'll start with the biggest nuisance, he said, locking eyes with Akane. Minato raised his sword up, his Cloud Bankai at his side as always. He had no idea what Naruto was going to do, but they needed to be prepared. Destruction. Naruto didn't move. He didn't move one muscle, he was scarcely even breathing anymore. That didn't mean that all was well on the battlefield, however. Somewhere next to Minato, Akane screamed. The man looked down at her in alarm, not understanding what was going on. Her eyes were wide with pain and terror, her mouth open in a scream. Minato's mind went numb when he saw a gaseous red energy flow out from Akane's mouth. It spread out in the air, but it was moving in the direction of Naruto, who remained completely still. No, wait a minute. Minato thought, his mind working a mile a minute. The red Ryuryoku was coming from Akane, and from the looks of it, it was being sucked into Naruto's conductors. Naruto was absorbing the Ryuryoku from Akane's body, without even touching her. Minato's mind tried to figure out a way to stop the process. He knelt down by his daughter's side, racking his brain for any Kido that may be able to halt the process. What was he thinking? There was no way to stop this. Daddy! Make it stop! Akane screamed. It pained Minato to see her in this much pain, but it was about to get worse. Red Ryuryoku was beginning to leak from every pore in her body. In addition to that, her eyes exploded into blood as Ryuryoku began to be drawn out from them as well, much to Minato and Kushina's horror. No! Not my Akane as well! Kushina cried, tears streaming down her face. Minato couldn't blame her. She had almost lost all composure when she learned the news of Taiki's death. Seeing her second child die would no doubt break her. Akane started convulsing when the last of her Ryuryoku had been drawn out, but that was only the first part of the attack. Her body was withered from the complete lack of Ryuryoku, and her eyes were bloody holes that were eerily similar to Naruto's own. She raised an arm desperately, apparently trying anything to stop the pain. However, Minato panicked when he witnessed light blue particles fly off from Akane's body, the flesh of her arm disappearing as the particles flowed toward Naruto's conductors. The Primera did not move during the entire ordeal, and he seemed at peace as he absorbed everything from Akane's body. Minato knew what he was doing, he was absorbing her soul. It was her erasure, the very thing that made up her body. The rest of her body structure collapsed, and in her final moments she stared up at her father, her face in a pleading gesture even as half her body withered away into erasure. He knelt down before her, activating the only healing Kido he knew, but it was useless. Akane reached out to touch him one last time, before her entire body withered away into the flow of erasure. Naruto climbed to his feet as he absorbed Akane's souls, staring down at the dejected parents. He smiled his signature manic grin at them as he finished, panning his eyes over from the crying Kushina to the sullen Minato, who stared at him back. "What did you do?" he croaked weakly. Naruto noted with glee that by killing both of his children, he seemed to take all the life and fight from both Minato and Kushina. Destruction. My strongest technique, and the technique I learn once I activate all 9 of my tails and awaken El Hueco Perfecto. It is also the basic hollow technique in existence, stealing a soul. Naruto took a few short paces up to them. Absorbing erasure from the environment is an ability that every single hollow possesses, but normally that only applies to the spirit particles from our environment. Any being with a sufficient Ryatsu would easily resist being consumed in that manner. Naruto paused. Normally, my own abilities allow me to draw Ryuryoku from things that make contact with me body or my conductors. However, once I activate El Hueco Perfecto, I can the ability to draw both Ryuryoku and erasure from any source without even touching the object. This of course includes a physical body. He said, and he seemed to be mulling over the next part of his speech. It is a one-hit kill move. In this state, if I will it, I can absorb your soul itself no matter the strength of your Ryatsu. Of course, with beings of high Ryatsu such as yourselves, there is a 2-minute cooldown period before I can use destruction again. Minato's stony expression seemed to realize something at that point, and the abomination before them chuckled lowly. I'm sure you realize. It has been over 2 minutes since I've started talking. Minato looked over, his eyes wide as Naruto halted once again. The feeling of déjà vu fell over him. It was the same prerequisite to when he sucked out Akane's soul. Minato turned to his wife in concern, seeing her kneel down at the place where Akane had disintegrated not too long ago. She was mumbling to herself, tears falling down from her red hair. Her head snapped up, and she glared at Naruto with barely restrained hatred. "You monster," she roared, picking up the blue sword Akane gave her and charging. It was the only piece of her daughter that she had left. She would slay Naruto with it herself, no matter the cost. Naruto smiled as she got close. The spiral on his stomach and his whirring conductors fell silent once again. Even the liquid Ryatsu seemed to stop leaking from his orifices for just a moment. It was exactly the same, and there was nothing anyone could do stop it. Before Kushina could lop Naruto's head off with her sword, she fell to the ground, coughing and sputtering. Minato's heart went into panic mode. This was exactly the same as last time. First his daughter, and now his beloved wife. It was too much to take, even for him. Red Ryuryoku starting gushing out from Kushina's mouth as she screamed. Her sword clattered to the ground uselessly, as the same red Ryuryoku started gushing out of every pore in her body as if it were sweat, and began to flow into the spikes upon Naruto's shoulders. Once he had completely drained Kushina of all her Ryuryoku, he moved on to absorbing her erasure. Images of Akane's death flashed through Minato's mind as he rushed to rescue his wife, but her entire body was already beginning to disintegrate into spirit particles. By the time he got there, she was already halfway gone. He picked up what remained of her body. Tears streaming down his cheeks. She stared up at him as her body dissolved, smiling lightly at him. "Don't make that face, Minato. You know we have to pass on eventually. It just looks like I'm gonna move on before you. Make sure you stop Naruto. For all of our sakes," she whispered. "But, Kushina," Minato croaked. "I love you. We've spent more than 3 centuries together. I can't even imagine living my life without you." Minato blubbered, and Kushina placed a dissolving hand on his face. "And I love you too. But, I want you to live on, and be happy. Don't blame yourself. Akane and Taiki may be dead, all of our friends may be dead, and I will be joining them soon." She trailed off, breathing heavily now. "But you will find a new purpose. Defeat Naruto and pick up the pieces left behind. I know you can do it. You have never failed before," Kushina weakly told her beloved husband. Tears were falling down her withered face at this point, as beautiful blue rapier were flying through the air. Minato regarded her with a tearful smile, which Kushina returned as cheerfully as she could. "Yeah," he said softly, as her body drifted away into nothing more than rapier. He couldn't find it in his heart to tell her the truth. He couldn't find it in his heart to tell her that he had just 2 minutes to live. He also knew that he was probably the last Shinigami now. There was nothing to rebuild. "Are you finished now?" Naruto asked, absorbing the last stream of blue rapier into his conductors. "You understand now that you're the last one left, Dad? Everyone else is dead." Minato dried his eyes, climbing to his feet while he regarded the spot where his dying wife lay just seconds ago. There was already nothing left to remember her by. He slowly reached out, grabbing the blue sword that Kushina had dropped. He caressed the hilt of it softly, lifting it and testing its weight. He pointed it at Naruto. "Yeah. 2 minutes. I could just maul you right now and get it over with, but where's the fun in that? I'll take it slow and help you enjoy your final 2 minutes alive," Naruto said, laughing. He held out his hand, creating an orange sword made entirely of Ryu-Ryoku. "Let's see if you can even keep up with me holding back this much," he roared, charging Minato. "He wants an even fight right before he kills me. What a waste of time. Still, I've got enough pride to go out fighting, so what the hell." Minato held out his blade, blocking the strike from Naruto as the two locked blades. 1 minute and 45 seconds. Minato tried to counter, pushing Naruto off him and kicking the Aaronkar in the stomach. He felt pain lash up through his leg. The Aaronkar's arrow was super strong in this state. He struck back with as much ferocity as he could, but he was weak. Though, if there was the slightest inkling of a chance that he could defeat Naruto, he'd take it. Perhaps the Primera's stupidity would be his downfall. He had to try. He swung with reckless abandon, disregarding all forms of defense to press the attack. He knew that his body didn't matter at this point, not with under 2 minutes to live. 1 minute and 20 seconds. Naruto leaped back, charging up a Zero. Novino Zero. When he released the beam, it soared out for miles on either side, lapping at both of the ruined village's borders as it soared through the air all the way past the ruined gates in the south. Minato was calm though, and all he had to do is hold his sword out and cut straight through it. Akane's final gift was imbued with the power to cut through Naruto's attacks. He could cut a Zero with this special sword. 1 minute. He thought, looking at the display of the whirling vortex and humming shoulder spikes on Naruto's person. The Primera himself seemed to be keeping track of the time. The powerful Zero raced by him harmlessly, and Minato crouched low and switched hands with his sword. Naruto fanned his awakened tails in front of him, thrusting 3 of them down in different places near where Minato stood. Those things were heavier than they looked. Minato charged as much Ryatsu into his sword as he could, holding it aloft as he prepared to stab Naruto. 30 seconds. Naruto sidestepped it easily, using Sonido to get directly behind Minato. He used his own sword to try and sweep him underneath his feet and cut his legs off, but Minato leaped over that easily, holding his sword behind his back to block the next strike. 15 seconds. Now! Minato roared, putting all his Ryatsu and strength into a final two-handed strike that would cut Naruto down. Naruto himself seemed surprised at the ferocity of the attack. It was even faster than he could react. 10 seconds. I can do this, he thought to himself, and slashed down with his final shot. Naruto seemed shocked, and even allowed some fear to enter his features, before his posture relaxed. Just kidding, he said, laughing all the way. When the sword impacted Naruto's torso, it failed to cut through. All of the Ryu-Ryoku had been drained from the sword. Minato's mind went numb. Of course, it would be like this. He was faking it all the way. If he wanted to, he could have drawn the Ryu-Ryoku from my sword before the fight even started. I'm an idiot. Minato was promptly kicked in the stomach, where he flew back 10 feet and collapsed into the dirt. He never stood a chance. Naruto's power had been overwhelming from the beginning. That last spat was really nothing more than a symbolic battle. He just wanted to drag this out a little longer. For fun. And now, there's no time for me. Well, that was fun. You still couldn't do much, though, and all fun things must come to an end. It's been more than 2 minutes now. I'll treat you to the same death as your wife and daughter, Dad. Minato saw the shadow of Naruto fall over him, the Primera Espada looking down at him and mocking him as he prepared to end his life. At least it will be finally over. Minato thought. It was better this way. There was nothing left for him in this world. The man felt a deep pain rack him to the very core of his body. He opened his mouth to scream, and he saw his bright yellow Ryoryoku being forced from his system to be added to Naruto's collection. It was strange. Despite the intense pain, the more prominent feeling of his body turning to erasure took over. He didn't know how to describe, but it was a deep, nagging feeling that took over after Naruto had finished taking all his Ryoryoku. As his body disintegrated, the final thing that Minato was the fierce, unapologetic grin of the creature that Minato had once called son. He turned away in his final moment, before his soul was stolen and everything went black. Thus, Namikaze, Minato died. Naruto was sitting upon the ruined Hokage Tower when he realized that there were no humans in sight. This place had been long since abandoned, which meant there was no real purpose for him here anymore. He always knew that he would leave all traces of his connection to Konoha behind one day, and move on. Right now, he could say that there was no one alive to tie him to Konoha anymore. The Primera had remained in his Resurrección, Segunda Etapa even after the battle, though he supposed there was no reason. It felt more natural this way, though he could without a doubt return to his sealed state at any time. Naruto stared at the sky. Although he couldn't see the portal, he could sense its connection to Soul Society and Hueco all throughout the fight with his family. Now that some time had passed, he could no longer sense that same connection in the sky. It was pretty obvious that both of the other realms had been fully merged into the real world some time ago. Perhaps it had happened during the fight with his family, because Naruto couldn't pinpoint the exact moment when. Soul Society and Hueco were no more, in more ways than one. There was no way for any Shinigami or Hollow to have survived the reformation of one realm, unless they managed to escape into the portal like he did before their world collapsed. Considering no one knew what was going on, that was unlikely. All three realms had reformed into one, but there would be no remnants of Soul Society or Hueco in the real world. All of the Shinigami were dead, all of the Hollow in Hueco were dead, and there was no carryover effect of anything else from either world. Of course, as long as humans existed, so would Hollows. They would no doubt appear again before long. On the other hand, the Shinigami were well and truly wiped out. Naruto jumped down from the balcony of the Hokage Tower, touching down upon the streets of the village. It was time for him to leave this place for good, both physically and in his memories. It was time for him to move on, and see what would happen without any Shinigami. After all, he had the entire real world to explore. So ends Aminaza. This story is finally complete. I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you to everyone who stuck through the ups and downs of this what if. I'd appreciate it if you left one last comment. If you've gone through this story quietly, I'd love to hear from you just once now that the story has been officially completed. Peace.